Welcome to the Strap and Link podcast, where we cover brands from their inception to their latest release.
It's the Montrous Tudor.
Like I said, better movement, spring drive potentially, Rolex Oyster Perpetual.
There's Super Ocean here. Now you see this kind of renaissance of Tudor.
Finally, in 2016, they achieved the spring drive with an 8-day power. The podcast for watch lovers by watch lovers. New episodes every first and third Monday of the month.
Yeah, so funny thing about that, I looked up the Ventura, and I gotta say, it's not a great deal because it's a quartz watch. They're charging almost $1,000 for it.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. Depending, I mean, I'm looking at some over here, $1,800 for the Ventura. And now they might be no, that's actually not automatic. Yeah, but no, you're right. Yeah, $895 for quartz.
Yeah, I mean, $975 for the model I'm looking at with like a crocodile strap on it.
I mean, a lot of places. I mean, before you really know a lot about what you're looking at. I mean, can you tell me how many people go into a Belks and pay $600? I was one of them. $600 for a Movado watch. Quartz, cheap.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, sure, it's a cool style, and I mean the brand recognition's there, but I feel like that's what these people are capturing.
Interesting. Well,
kind of different.
Yeah. Welcome back to the Strap and Link podcast, everybody. This is Brett here again with David.
What's going on, guys?
Yeah, we talking about Hamilton, if you haven't figured that out. We're going to come back to that on the Ventura. Yeah. But how have you been, man?
Been good, man. Just been working. So we always carve out time for this this good podcast. And I think, like you said, we're getting better and better at it. So it's becoming easier and more fun. I know you probably have a lot to talk about. You just went to the Grand Seiko event in Atlanta. Tell me about that. How was that? I unfortunately was in Chicago, so I missed it, but that's probably the biggest night of FOMO I've ever had was seeing you guys all there and who you got to meet. So tell us about it.
Yeah, man. Very fun event. If any listeners are out there and you are not part of like a local watch club or a red bar or something like that, I personally would definitely encourage you to take a look and see what's local to you, especially if you live in a bigger market like New York or LA or something like that. But so this was a Atlanta Watch Society event that Grand Seiko was, attended and sort of sponsored. So it was a great event at the Kinjo Room in Atlanta. So very, very nice sort of decor and just kind of aesthetic to hold that event at. We had sushi boats and appetizers. Had a couple of.
They went all out. It looked like.
Oh yeah. It definitely went all out. Anything and everything that you were thinking was going to be there was pretty much there when it comes to watches as well. So a lot of the new stuff, and Grand Seiko released a lot of new stuff, just
all the time,
in general. But for this podcast and for listeners of the show, we did our episode on Grand Seiko all the way back in February. So we were about 1.5 months away from Watches and Wonders. So a lot of the watches that released there, we saw, some were, prototype, but does not make that any less cool. So the platinum, white birch, I believe platinum, that is hand carved on the case as well. So not just the dial, but the case, that one actually had a movement inside of it. So if you follow us on Instagram, I've got a reel up now of just a few quick little rough shots. It was very dimly lit, so apologies for the for the lack of photo quality. But man, it was the works for sure. And like you said, I met Joe Kirk there as well. So many of you might know him from being in some of Teddy's videos pretty recently, talking about a lot of the new watches that him and John from Grand Seiko brought. So it was really fun. Definitely missed you. And we did a live stream during that. So I don't know, maybe we'll do some more of those going forward. But maybe some
especially when cool companies and all are there. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I was thinking, I was like, whoever, because the first Atlanta Watch Society meeting I went to was, very humble, I guess you could say. It was just at the clubhouse, just very normal. And that's what I feel like the majority of them are, is that, somebody's neighborhood clubhouse or maybe renting out a brewery. But if I was like, man, if this was your first one you went to, you got all everything rolled out for you. It looked very cool, very nice area. Where was it? What part of Atlanta did they have it in?
Yeah, Kinjo Room is in West Midtown. So
Okay.
for Atlanta listeners, that's over by like Ormsby's, where that used to be. I used to live in Midtown, and it used to kind of like only be what was over there was like Ormsby's and a few other little places to eat. Uh, what is that name of that bar? Is it Little Spirit or Little Trouble? One of those two is back over there. It's a cool bar.
Hmm.
Always crowded. Neon light at the entryway is definitely the
Yeah.
insta backdrop for a lot of the basic white bitches. But yeah, over in that general area of town, West Midtown. So yeah, it's
Mhm.
all pretty new over there, and Kinjo Room was legit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was it was definitely an awesome event. This one just had a little bit, of something extra on top of it.
Mhm.
Because yeah, some of the ones that are not brand related or sponsored, we've met like the guys at Monta before, and now some folks from Grand Seiko. So when they're not sponsored like that, um, yeah, like you said, it's kind of more of like a meet and greet, just kind of getting to
Which
network
is
with
still
people.
great.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly, yeah, yeah. But I mean, but some people actually like that more, probably because
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of us bring like watch rolls, and
Mhm.
sometimes people are they've
More
got
of
a
a you
car
get to
like
see
this
your
one's for sale.
friends. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I heard that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like when it's a big sponsored event like that, you definitely don't get to do as much of that. They're usually smaller venues and there's music. It's just louder. It's just a different
Mhm.
vibe.
Yeah.
In either case, it's both a fun time, but yeah, this one was very special.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
cool.
cool, man. Well, let's go ahead and jump into the history of Hamilton. So we're going to talk about founding, of course, some movie watches, and some of our favorites from the current collection. So we're
Yeah.
going to get into that, but just really quickly, from David and I here at Strap Link, it would mean a ton to us if everyone could maybe just give us like a rating and a review on your favorite podcast app,
Yeah.
whether that's Spotify or Apple. Obviously, this helps us to be seen. We do have all 5 stars at the moment, I believe. I know on Spotify we're all 5 stars across the board. I think on Apple too. But there's only just kind of like 9 or 10 of those. So even if it's just like a sentence or two, these guys rock, these guys suck. Your honest feedback. We don't want you to lie in there, but yeah, just a rating, maybe a quick review would go very far for us. So
Definitely. Subscribe and give us the thumbs up. You know what to do. All right,
yeah,
so history, here we go. This is one of our favorite, brands, I guess you could say, when it comes to history. I think there's a lot to be said with how they started and what they became and really what they still are today. They're such an underrated brand in my opinion. Um, there's always these few watch brands to me that they they have a cooler story than most, put it that way, and even if the price points don't reflect it, which honestly is great. I think Longines and Hamilton are up there, the pinnacle of just story from
mm,
where they became and what they represent and everything. So I know we've already talked about Longines a few months ago. So if you haven't listened to that, definitely go back and listen and compare it to this episode. But I think these are two of the probably most storied, just cool history. We get a Rolex and everybody else, we love them, and their history is cool. But when you're just talking about just these guys transcend just the watch community. Longines does, and Hamilton does as well. So it's definitely a cool brand, and we're excited to hop into it.
yeah, for sure. I definitely echo that. I know you've been really excited about the movie aspect. We've, I think both of us went back and watched the little Interstellar
Yeah.
over the past week or so, and the Hamilton website is really cool. So we definitely encourage you to go check that out if you haven't. There's a lot of really cool information on their website about their watches. I'm looking, like we said at the very top, looking at a
Hmm.
Ventura quartz right now on their website, and they've got it very clearly marked. Featured in Men in Black 1, 3, and
Yep.
4, and then it tells you even like within that movie who all that was worn by. So very cool stuff. Well, without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. So the Hamilton Watch Company was founded in 1892 right here in Pennsylvania in the U.S. So I didn't actually know that until somewhat recently. But yeah, very cool. Founded here in America by a group of investors that was led primarily by J.W. Bill Hamilton. And since its founding, of course, as they state on their website, quality and accuracy have been at the heart of their vision, and those principles have made Hamilton the now internationally renowned watch brand that it is today. About 10 years later, in 1893, Hamilton introduced their first watch, which was called the Hamilton 936, or just the 936. This was a very reliable and precise pocket watch. And, you have to remember at this time, we're late 19th century here. Rail travel was a much, much more common mode of transportation than it is today. So not only logistics and freight and things like that, but actual, human transportation. And so just, as a correlation or maybe causation, many accidents occurred on railways simply due to a lack of accurate timekeeping. So Hamilton really spent many of their early years specifically innovating their pocket watches for railway workers.
Yeah.
And eventually, this timepiece, specifically the 936, gained a reputation for accuracy and eventually earned itself the nickname the Watch of Railway Accuracy.
Once they became the official supplier to the U.S. Armed Forces during World War I, Hamilton equipped hundreds of soldiers with their timepieces during this time. This prompted a shift in from production from the pocket watches to their more convenient wristwatches, and of course, that was a change that was here to stay. And if anybody actually ever wondered, this is where the khaki field heritage comes from. And by World War II, Hamilton shifted his focus to support the U.S. military effort so much that they even ceased production of their civilian models for a few years. Between 1942 and 1945, Hamilton produced over 1 million timepieces, included wristwatches and marine chronometers, earning the Army-Navy E Award for excellence in manufacturing at the time.
Yeah, I was pretty shocked to read that the other day that they stopped all production. So very cool. So
Yeah.
and again, to hark back on that, that's where the khaki field lineup comes from. So very evident that Hamilton, they've got the chops for the field watches that they're making. And speaking of chronometers, in 1941, Hamilton introduced the Marine Chronometer Model 21. This was an essential navigation instrument for battleships and aircraft carriers. But one of Hamilton's most noteworthy events and moments came during World War II, when the company supplied the U.S. military with watches called the Grade 2. This was a stereotypical field watch with a black dial and that tan and sort of gold coloring on the handset and the numerals. So if anyone is familiar with Hamilton already, you sort of know what I'm talking about here, because that's still evident today, even on, like the Murph, for example, right? Probably the most popular movie watch is going to be the khaki filled Murph. And so that sort of, that kind of vintage, like the faux patina, and the faux loom, it's kind of that gold, yellow hue. So that's what they were actually produced like back in the day.
Yeah.
In 1951, the Hamilton Canteen was produced, and this is a pretty cool watch. So it's not a dive watch, but it does feature a special water-resistant case that did have a screw-down crown. And watches like these were actually supplied to the U.S. naval underwater demolition divers during World War II. And if you don't know, the underwater demolition divers at that time were the predecessor to the Navy SEALs. So eventually became frogmen, eventually became Navy SEALs. And in 1966, the first official Hamilton khaki field is produced, birthing the legendary collection that we're all very familiar with today. And worth noting, also wanted to put this in here, that Hamilton also provided watches to the British military around in the 1970s. And if I recall correctly, I think they produced and delivered over, 40 or 50,000 watches to the British military. So not only to the American military, but Hamilton really do have their chops when it comes to actual field watches.
Yeah, I mean, they're just a truly force to be reckoned with during the world wars, one and two. Kind of stepping off into that, just talking about different models during the movies that have came out in the last 20 or so years. Before we step off and really talk about movies, I did want to mention that this watch is also featured in the Band of Brothers miniseries on HBO as well. I realized that. I just actually rewatched it. I don't even think I put this in for Brett to see, but I was rewatching, I think episode 7 or 8. It was just a clear shot of their watches, and I was like, even back then in 2000, they knew the watches that were used, and they were making it accurate.
Was it the Canteen? That one was it?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's got because the Canteen has like the screw down crown. It like the top right lug. If you're looking at the dial, the top right lug, which would be closer to like the 2 o'clock position, it has like a little arm that goes off of the lug down to the crown, and then that is the mechanism that actually screws down.
Okay.
So pretty recognizable.
Yeah.
Which I think that was probably one of the first iterations of a screw down crown. I could be wrong in that, but I'm just imagining
It was
that was
definitely in
the
those
reason.
early years. Yeah.
Yeah, because you definitely don't see a whole lot of those.
Yeah. Yeah, but just cool. I mean, even back then, again, you understand, I guess, now seeing those are two very documented times, World War One and World War Two. You would understand that they'd be in a lot of movies because there's a lot of movies about that time.
Yeah.
So, stepping off even from there in the realm of cinema, Hamilton watches have also played a prominent role. Hamilton's watches have appeared in numerous iconic films, solidifying their presence in cinematic history. The biggest, for example, is the Khaki field that we've talked about already, also known as the Murph, which is featured in the Interstellar movie in 2014 and brought a full production in 2019. Obviously, everybody wanted that watch. This was one of the most popular movies in the mid 2000s, 2010s, I guess you'd say. I'll say 2000s, but 2010s. And so they brought it as the decade was coming to an end. The Murph also had a 38 millimeter version released in 2022. Besides the Murph, Hamilton appears with another khaki field model in the Martian in 2015. And I feel like that's a much more under the radar movie that, again, I guess under the radar movie, and then under the radar that Hamilton's in that movie. Everybody always talks about Interstellar and how they're, I guess, because it's such a crucial part in the movie.
Yeah, it
but
plays to
really
like a
talks about
plot
Martian.
point in Interstellar. Yeah.
And also, Christopher Nolan put it in his newer movie Tenet, which came out a few years back.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, the Hamilton Ventura, which we've talked about to start the show, and it's very, I don't want to say controversial, but you either love it or hate it piece.
Oh yeah.
It's a very unique and iconic timepiece, which gained worldwide recognition when it was worn by Elvis in 1961 movie Blue Hawaii, and continued to make appearances in various films and TV series throughout the years. This marked the beginning of Hamilton's association with Hollywood, and the watch appeared again in the original Men in Black in 1997, as well as Sopranos in the, I guess, early 2000s was when Sopranos came out. That
I think
shows my age a little bit.
Yeah. I think started in like 98, 99, and probably
Okay.
probably wrapped up around 2005, something like that.
Yeah, so obviously, again, this started back in 1961. They started bringing it into movies, and then throughout the whole late 1900s and definitely into the early 2000s was when it really took off. And this was even featured in the most recent Indiana Jones franchise film. I forgot the name of the latest movie in 2023. I have it written down later in, because we're actually going to talk about that watch that was featured in the Indiana Jones movies, because it's kind of a dupe from a more vintage watch that came out in 1936. So we will speak about that soon.
I've been wondering about that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. The is it Boulton or Bolton?
Boulton.
Okay, so the Boulton is the one featured in the newest Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
So remember that name, the Hamilton Boulton.
Boulton.
Which is also, if you go to the website today looking for this watch, that's also going to be the name that it's under. One interesting thing I was going to say about the about the Murph in Interstellar. So it's not going to ruin a plot point here, or the plot, but in one specific scene, Matthew McConaughey's character is sending a message in Morse code via the watch.
Yeah.
So bouncing the second hand sort of back and forth in Morse code to relay a message. So I very recently heard that the way that they actually achieved that, they took the mechanical movement out of the watch, they replaced it with an electronic movement, and then they had the watch actually wired up to this little device that is off camera, of course, and you could basically tap a button on that device, and that button would bounce the second hand back and forth. So if you knew Morse code and you're connected to this watch, like the movie set or the prop people from the movie were, of course, you can tap it. And I don't know Morse code, so I don't know if it's actually in there.
I don't know if it's real or fake Morse, but I'm sure it's real Morse code, because I know that movie was very, grounded in scientific theories, at least, of things that are theoretically possible that we knew at the time. So I would imagine it is. My question to you before we kind of move on is, what did you, I didn't bring it up, and I don't know if you wanted to bring it up. What did you think about the Day Pilot Aviator? The other watch that was featured in the movie, obviously, that Matthew McConaughey's character Cooper wears throughout the movie. Do you have any opinion on it? Do you like it? Do you like the khaki field watch obviously more?
Oh, I definitely like the Murph more. I'm not even familiar with the day date that Coop wears in the movie. I
Hmm.
mean, I know it's featured in the movie. He pulls out two watches and he's like, one for me and one for you.
Yeah.
But if I'm not mistaken, isn't that like the end of Coop's watch in the movie? Like the day date doesn't really play, or it's not
Yeah, it
really
doesn't play any
featured.
time, any significant role like the Murph
Yeah.
does, but it's definitely a interesting.
Okay.
Honestly, I think it's if you like a sporty day date, is probably one of the few ones out there. I
Okay.
believe Hamilton still sells it. It's a little bit bigger of a watch. It's cool, and of course you can say it's from that movie. And
Right. Right.
but
Now,
obviously the
I
Murph
love
is
the
much more
Murph.
iconic. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love the Murph. It's I don't really know why I don't have one. Initially it was the sizing, so for anyone wondering why they released another model of it in 2022 in 38 millimeters, because that was really the only complaint from people, was that
Hmm.
the and especially being a field watch, because I think people would be okay. Sometimes you kind of expect like a dive watch or a GMT, maybe a GMT, but certainly a dive watch to be pushing the 41, 42, 43 millimeter range.
Hmm.
And so I think for a field watch to be at 42 millimeter in 21st century watch collecting space, I think that was the big and really the only blowback. So now they've got a new 38 millimeter, which I definitely plan on owning one of. The only thing that I don't like about it, and another little tidbit, is that the original model released in 2019 on the seconds hand actually has, in Morse code, again going back to Morse code, it has the word Eureka on the seconds hand.
Hmm.
The 38 millimeter does not have that. So I don't know if that plays into anyone's decision on purchasing that watch, because if you're looking for the movie watch, you're not really gonna get it quite on that
It's like
38 millimeter.
purchasing a remastered version.
Basically, yeah, yeah. It's kind of I kind of liken it the equivalent of you're buying like a vintage watch from the 60s or the 70s, but someone's
Hmm.
polished it up, and so it looks like it's brand new.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool, I guess, because it doesn't feel like an old watch, but you've also lost all of that patina and all of that just history with it. So,
Yeah.
but nonetheless, just wanted to throw that tidbit out there. Let's move on through the history and get this wrapped up so we can jump into some current collections. So in 1957, Hamilton made horological history with the introduction of the Hamilton Electric, one of the world's first battery-powered wristwatches, which marked a significant advancement in watch technology. Because if you recall, in 1957, this is only a few years before the quartz crisis. The
Hmm.
Hamilton Electric was followed by the Ventura in 1957 also, which David just mentioned. Again, notable for that triangular case design. You sort of either love it or hate it.
Yeah.
This was the world's first battery powered watch. Fun fact, and like David just said, Elvis Presley famously wore a Ventura in the 1960 film Blue Hawaii. So everyone's probably seen that famous shot in black and white of Elvis sort of cheesing, wearing a military army uniform. I don't know if that's his army uniform, but yeah, very very cool. And then in the early 1960s, Hamilton decided to move production from the US to Switzerland. So this was, of course, a strategic decision to just simply align better with the rest of the Swiss watchmaking industry, so that they could sort of branch away from, American made, get the Swiss made stamp at the bottom of their dials, which, all of this has an obvious attraction. So for anyone wondering, yes, born and founded and headquartered initially in the US in Pennsylvania, and yeah, in the early 60s moved full production to Switzerland. So
Hmm. Which again, we'll talk about a few. I know in some of my watch collections, talk about some of the more vintage ones that were actually still made in the U.S. and how that's even. This is a very U.S. based watch. I feel like you almost get the pride, U.S. proud, for wearing one. So it's cool to have a vintage watch that was even made back in the U.S. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But Hamilton made another groundbreaking move in 1970s when it introduced the Hamilton Pulsar, the first electronic digital watch. This innovation revolutionized the watch industry by replacing the traditional mechanical movements with accurate ones, of course. Over the years, Hamilton continued to innovate and transition from pocket watches to wristwatches, and producing a variety of iconic models, including the Hamilton Electric that we just spoke about, the Hamilton Pulsar, and another watch we'll talk about later in the episode, the Hamilton Jazzmaster.
Yep. And, of course, continuing out throughout the 21st century, Hamilton continued to produce a wide range of watches. So again, if you've never been to their website, definitely encourage you to do that. Just take a look at some of the collections from Field, Pilot, even some dive watches, which I think that's probably a pretty big weak spot. But, they've really only got one bit of history from their brand that really focuses on divers, and that was back with those demolition dive teams. So definitely encourage you to do that. But I would say that today, Hamilton is a very respected brand for sure. They don't quite have like some of the like horological achievement and chops that the likes of like a Longines have, or maybe even like a Tissot maybe. So they don't have necessarily all of those, like, we just talked a few weeks ago on the Seiko episode how like Seiko had done so many firsts for the Japanese domestic market.
Oh yeah.
And if for no other reason than the fact that they were first on the scene, I think that's why Seiko is so big, and that's how Grand Seiko was sort of imagined, is because they were just first on scene and they really innovated. So Hamilton might not have all of that going for it, but they still make excellent watches for the money. And that's one of the biggest things, is that the value is there. And the history and the heritage is certainly there too. But obviously besides that, it's the movie thing. I think a lot of people are associating Hamilton more and more today with movies. I feel like you have the Khaki Field collection and then you've got movies. And most people tend to think one of those two things whenever they associate Hamilton watches.
Yeah, I think a big reason why maybe, the innovation wasn't there in the old days was these guys were tasked with just making a dependable watch that you knew would work
That's true.
in a, rough environment. And maybe for better or worse, that did take them away from their, sitting there in a factory for years on end trying to make something slightly better. They said, hey, let's mass produce this, let's get this out, it's not going to break, you can whack it up against a tree, you can whack it on a gun, whatever, when you're out there. And they were more, just making sure the material held up. And maybe now this was, of course, almost 100 years ago and 80 years ago now. You would think maybe now they're starting to innovate a little more, which I think they are, but I definitely think that maybe put them behind the ball when other watch companies during this time, or definitely in the 50s and 60s, was really innovating and doing very cool, miraculous stuff, like Omega and other watch companies like that, obviously in the 60s was taking off.
Right.
So, you never know. Again, we weren't around back then in those boardroom meetings and, what their thought process was, but maybe that is just a reason why, maybe the movement isn't there as much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the fact that they chose to go after, rail watches, for lack of a better genre name to start with. I mean, if you look at like the Hamilton 936, that first one that we talked about, they made several iterations of that, and then they continue, and they added complications to those pocket watches. They were selected as they were selected by the U.S. government as the, again, for lack of a better name here, as like it was something like the official like watch provider or timekeeper of like the American made railroads in France. It was a confusing sentence whenever I read this on their website, but the point being, like David said, they focused on like practical stuff, right? They focused on rail watches initially, and then a few years later, the First World War started. They kind of tinkered with some military stuff, and then by World War II, again, like David mentioned, they stopped making things. They stopped producing watches for you and me to buy at all. So it could have set them back. And who's to say that they even care about that? I don't really know that they do. I think what they do is well positioned. So but that's what
we always talk about. You get a watch a lot of the times for one or two reasons. One, because you love the movement, or two, because you love the brand and the history of what's behind it. And I think these guys are definitely on that option number two. Yeah. And hey, for more power to them. They're selling a ton of them, and I know a lot of people that love them.
And guess what? Most of them are like $600. So
exactly,
even better. Yeah.
Yeah. And jumping now to the first collection we want to talk about, I think this is a great segue. I wanted to bring up the Hamilton Lawrence 1936. Okay, so this is a vintage watch. My buddy from high school actually just bought one, is why I knew anything really about it. He had talked to me about wanting a Boulton. He's like, yeah, I saw the Indiana Jones movie, and the watch on it was awesome. It's a very cool looking, rectangle watch. And so he was looking at him, but he was like all of us that, know something about watches. He was texting me asking, and he was very questionable when it comes to paying $800 to $900 for a quartz watch. I think it's like $795 a quartz. The watch that he was wanting, which is like a cream dial on a brown croc strap, from is the Boulton. So he was like, I don't know, maybe I'll kick it around, think about it. And he actually found this Lawrence 1936 vintage watch from a guy out in California that's had it throughout his, I think, family passed it down. This watch is very cool, and I hadn't heard anything about it, so I just kind of want to educate you guys. It was originally made in 1936, obviously. It was only made for 3 years, so from 1936 to 1939. It was their vintage dress watch, and actually for the time, which is funny, it was regarded as a very big watch. It's around maybe, I think, 27 millimeters by 31, kind of in that area, maybe a little bit smaller. But
It's so
people of the
small.
time were like, this is bold, this is out there. And it really honestly didn't take off too much because of that. They made it for 3 years. I think at the time, obviously this is during the Great Depression, towards the end of it, it sold for about $40. I
Wow.
think I saw old newspaper clippings offering it for like $37. So, a very
Wow.
cool watch. And he actually was able to get it for just at 400. And you're talking, it's a mechanical movement. Around a 20-hour power reserve.
Oh, that is it's mechanical.
Yeah, it's
The
mechanical.
36 that he got.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow.
And that's what he was so scared he got it in. He's like, yeah, I was
Yeah.
talking to this guy, and he showed me videos. We FaceTimed and all. It was working in California before he sent it, and it took him about 30 minutes he was like, I'm winding it, and he's calling me, am I winding it wrong? Am I just being crazy right here? What's going on? And he started getting nervous. He's like, well, worst comes to worst. He loved the watch. It looks great. He has a smaller wrist, so obviously that size fit him perfectly. And he was like, well, worst comes to worst, I'll just take it to one of your guys and, get him to service it, and we'll just get it working. But
Yeah.
after about 30 minutes, it was like it's just so old it needed to warm up, and it finally started working. And so he's
Wow. ecstatic,
needless to say, but a true 1936 watch. We posted it on our Instagram a few days ago. So we'll repost it definitely once this episode's out, get some pictures of it for you guys to look at. It's a very cool. Again, you're talking $400 versus paying $800 for the quartz version of the Boulton, which is pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
You'll be able to look at them. Maybe we'll even post a comparison, a side by side, from one on my buddy's wrist, and then one off their website, and you can see the subtle differences. But a big thing is, the mechanical movements. I think if you can find one of these vintage Lawrence watches, I would definitely recommend getting that over paying brand new $800 for a Hamilton quartz.
Yeah. I'm looking at the Boulton collection right now online, and there's $745 for all of the quartz. They have 3 mechanical models, which those are
Then you're jumping up to
$945, I
around,
believe.
I was gonna say, you're jumping up to close to $1,000 then, aren't you?
Yeah, so you'll be pushing 1,000 for the Boulton. And it's a little frustrating because I really like the look of the quartz one. They just have
That's the
more
thing I
available.
noticed. Yeah, that's the thing I
Yeah,
noticed. So the trying to look here, the American Classic Boulton quartz. It is a
quartz.
brown
Yeah.
crotch strap, gold casing with like an off-white center with also gold hour
It's
markers.
got a gold
Okay.
handset, hour
Yeah.
markers, small
That is
seconds
the
at the
best
6.
looking one by
Yep.
far to me.
And that's the Indiana Jones watch.
It's the Indiana Jones watch. It's only offered in quartz that I find. They have something
Yeah.
kind of similar to it in automatic, but if you want that watch, it's only offered in quartz for $750, not $800.
And I'd
$750.
probably buy that quartz watch if it were like $350.
Oh, yeah.
But if I could pay another $150 and get an automatic, I don't know. It just sounds like a lot to pay for a quartz watch when the automatic version's being offered for just another. What is it? Is it $200?
Yeah, just say.
Okay, so for another 200,
But again, it's the look. It's
The
kind of
look
like
is
you want the look of this, but you want the movement of that. How do you combine it? And the
yeah,
closest thing by far I found that combined it is going back to their vintage watch. Now, of
yeah,
course, these are going to be nowhere near as available. You've got to
right,
find it, and you got to hope everything goes well and all
yeah,
that. Probably buying from a private seller. But I mean, I think he hit the nail on the head, and I just wanted to tell you guys, if you love the Indiana Jones watch, at least put out fillers. Go to Chrono, go to eBay, see if you can find any vintage Lawrence 1936 is what it's called, and it's a very cool watch.
yeah.
So
It's a
definitely
damn
keep an
good
eye out.
looking dress watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, the quartz is going to be the only thing offered today from Hamilton that looks anything vintage.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, all of the mechanical models are going to look like, more like a Cartier tank, like a present day tank. It's going to
Yeah.
have a more contemporary colorway and match to it.
Roman numerals on the hour
Yeah,
markers instead of the cool thing about the Indiana Jones and I believe my buddies is you're going to be looking at like just a normal like 1, 2,
yeah,
3,
those
4, 5.
Arabic markers and
Yeah.
the font on them is really cool. Like the Indiana Jones one, which it also says on the site, featured
Yeah.
in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. That's the name of
That's
that
the name of the
new one.
movie.
Yeah,
I knew it started with a D, but I didn't want to say
yeah.
it wrong. Dial of
Well,
Destiny.
and that's the cool watch because, like you said, it's
Yeah.
got the Arabic markers on it. It's got Hamilton written across the top, and then it has the small seconds at the sixth. The small
Yeah.
seconds is one of my favorite things
And
about
that's
it because
exactly
that's very
what the
vintage.
and that's
Yeah.
exactly what the Lawrence has. And it's crazy. The Lawrence has all of that, has the subdial, the
Mm-hmm.
numbers I just looked at, the Hamilton written across the top. It even has like a striped, very subtle pattern in the dial itself, which I'm
Yeah.
not sure if
That
the
striping is odd to me.
Boulton does. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
different. Yeah, the
Yeah.
Boulton doesn't. It's just very plain on that. But the I guess here's the uptick, and this is what I told my buddy before he bought the Lawrence was I was like, man, if you're gonna get a quartz, this would be the type of quartz to get where the
Yeah.
ticking is only in your subdial, it's not across the entire watch. So if you
Mm-hmm.
just absolutely love this and you're on the fence, I mean, get it if you love it because your ticking will only be in the subdial. It won't be as noticeable. It's
Yeah.
still is a very good looking watch. So
Yeah.
don't let that just deter you if it's only the course and you're just absolutely in love with this watch, anything else, and you can't find a vintage version of this. But I'd rather get a quartz watch in this, look
And that
than a
layout.
quartz, a quartz, whatever, Cartier or something
Yeah.
that's big and very noticeable.
And that's also 2K or 15
Oh yeah,
2500 for
at
that
least.
possibly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, I mean, this is personally my favorite, I think, Hamilton offering from an aesthetics point of view.
Mm-hmm.
If I could only own one Hamilton watch, it'd probably be between the Boulton of some type and the khaki filled Murph.
Yeah.
So
Oh, definitely.
they're very
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. Definitely go check out the differences between them. There's a lot to offer there.
Yeah, just real quick before we step actually off into the khaki filled Murph, just to tell you guys
Mhm.
some statistics on this. Again, the old vintage, you're looking at a 2 bar of water resistance. The new Bolton, you're looking at a 3 bar. So there's hardly any water
Is that
resistance on
30
these.
meters?
So obviously not much water resistance there on even washing your hands would be about it. They
Yeah.
do have mechanical versions again around 1K, but you're looking at about 27 millimeters by 31 millimeters and 7.8 millimeters thick for the Bolton version.
All right. Well, let's move on to the second watch. My first one, going to talk about the khaki filled Murph. So really needs no introduction. So let me run through a few of the quick specs. As we mentioned in the history portion already, this watch was originally made for the movie Interstellar, which starred Jessica Chastain and Bradley Cooper, directed by Christopher Nolan back in 2014, won all the awards, and
It
then was
didn't star
released
Bradley
in.
Cooper.
Wait, what?
Matthew McConaughey, not Bradley Cooper.
Oh,
He
sorry.
restarted.
All right,
I was like, is
all
Bradley
right.
Cooper in that movie? I'm sitting here like, what? I don't think so.
Well, what is it? I mean, no, I don't know. I'm probably just thinking Bradley
American
Cooper's.
Sniper was
I was gonna say,
American Sniper.
yeah, Bradley Cooper's character in American Sniper. It always sticks out to me for some reason, and I always want to think that Bradley Cooper is this country ass, like American
God.
badass. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, they're probably just, yeah, it was just wires crossing.
You want to talk
So,
about a crazy movie that the guy looked exactly like he did in real life was freaking Bradley Cooper in American Sniper.
oh
If you
yeah,
look at them two side by
yeah,
side, that is one of the most perfect iterations of what Chris Kyle looked
yeah,
like in real
and
life.
his mannerisms too. If,
Perfect, man. That's
mm-hmm,
it's crazy. It feels like you're literally watching Chris Kyle because Chris Kyle was on a lot of interviews with I think Conan and stuff right before
yep,
he passed, and you watch those versus how he acted in the movie, and you're like, you would honestly think it's the same freaking person. It's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
But
Which I mean,
anyways, yeah,
that's why they
the
get paid
point.
what they get paid,
Yeah.
and
Well, sometimes, yeah, but then sometimes you're like, you can like,
yeah.
on Oppenheimer, again, another movie that Hamilton was very
Oh,
much,
we didn't talk about Oppenheimer.
was very much in during whatever his name is Oppenheimer's wearing it throughout the entire movie, and so is General Graves. But Albert Einstein in that movie, you're like, yeah, he looks similar, but like that you could tell that's just kind of a version of him. But like Bradley Cooper in that movie looked just like Chris
Yeah,
Kyle. It was crazy. But
he really did.
anyways, continue.
Yeah. So, Matthew McConaughey and Jessica Chastain, not Bradley Cooper. Released in 2019 as a full production model, and then re-released in 2022 as a 38 millimeter variant. So the original is going to be 42 millimeter. That's the Murph. The other one, Khaki Field Murph, but not the movie watch, is in 38. It doesn't have the Eureka on the second hand. To me, it's not the movie watch. Case thickness 11 11 millimeters there. I was gonna say 11 meters. I'm all over the place today. 11 millimeters on the case thickness. Water resistant to 100 meters, so it's a nice little like kind of do it all watch. Very
A
old
true
school
field
aesthetic.
watch. Yeah.
Yeah, very much, very much. It's gonna have the caliber H10, which is an ETA base beating at 3 hertz or 21,600 vibrations per hour. But the benefit to that, which David and I sort of bitch and complain about a lot, is going to be that the power reserve is bumped up on that. So 80 hours of power reserve there.
Very nice.
And then
That honestly surprises me a lot with Hamilton. A lot of their watches have 80-hour power reserve, which is very
well,
nice.
I don't know. I mean, none of the watches that I looked at beat at
Well,
4 hertz or higher.
the Jazzmaster is 80 hours and all as well. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, that's the big trade-off when you step down to that 3 hertz movement. Now,
Yeah.
the con to that is that if you really care about it, your seconds hand tick is going to be more noticeable. That shudder and tick that you're just going to see it more. But again, I don't think it's enough to bother anyone, because you're going to go from 40 or 42 or even 52 hours up to 80 hours of power reserve. And then I also appreciate that Hamilton did this for us. The original movie watch in 42 millimeters is going to be $995. The smaller 38 millimeter is going to be offered at $895. So at least you are saving a little bit when you go away from the movie watch. But in terms of like the significance behind this watch, I mean, we've talked about Interstellar, and it plays like a plot, like in the movie. It's not a character. Like, I'm not gonna wax romantics about that watch in the movie, but it is a critical point in the movie. So if you've never seen Interstellar for some reason, I highly recommend it. It's an amazing movie. But we already talked about sort of what they do with the movie to project Morse code, and it's actually funny because a lot of times when you see a watch, like a stock photo of a watch from the company website, usually you're going to have your hour marker pointed towards the 10, your minute marker pointed towards the 2 o'clock position. But for Hamilton, the seconds hand is sitting right between the 7 and the 8 numeral, which ironically in the movie is where the seconds hand bounces to render Morse code. So very cool. Yeah, and I mean, I think this is kind of like the flagship Khaki Field model to me. That's just one man's opinion, so you might differ, and listeners might really differ, because there's a good chance that some of the listeners own some Khaki Fields, and the Khaki Fields that you own might be some of the the big value bangs $500, $600, and $700 automatics that just do everything that a military field watch is supposed to do and nothing that they're not. So to me, I think that it's kind of the flagship Khaki Field because it at least represents like the epitome of what the Khaki Field model can be. This Oscar award-winning movie, which the watch plays this kind of somewhat of like a role in the movie. It's more pricey substantially compared to a good bit of the rest of that collection.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, we talked about like 100 meters of water resistance. You have the vintage styling. You've got the movie association, all packaged under, in the 38 millimeters case, under $900. So, yeah, I mean, I love that watch. Do you have any kind of opinions, like one way or the other? Like, what do you think about this watch compared to like the rest of the Khaki Field collection?
I think this is their most iconic. When you think of Hamilton, you think of this. When you think of Omega, you think of Speedmaster. And when you think of Hamilton, you think of the Khaki Field, and especially the black dial with the Murph. That's what it is, black dial with the tannish hour markers. Always 12, 1, 2, 3, 4. Very American, not Roman numerals, not tick. It's just very. It's funny how if you are filming a movie, about America, or whether that's NASA, whether that's the U.S. Army, whatever, it's a rite of passage to have a Hamilton watch on. It seems like, and I think these are very, very iconic watches. I also think again they're the aviation pilot day date that Matthew McConaughey's character wears in it is also a great looking watch, and I think these two honestly are very complementary, meaning you could probably own both and wear them at two very different occasions, and would be a cool little Hamilton collection to have, to say you got both of the watches from Interstellar. But I mean, I think again, great watch. The 80 hours is amazing. I do like the little attention to details right between the 7 and the 8 for the second hand, and they knew somehow to make that into the movie, and whether that was the movie decision, then Hamilton did it afterwards or vice versa. I think it's a very cool little Easter egg. Again, Hamilton's website, I don't think we've spoken about this. Hamilton's website is very movie friendly, very history friendly, which I love. You can click on their watches tab, and they have mechanical watches, automatic watches, pilot watches, movie watches, and then limited edition watch. So they have very broken out. Even if you just want to see what all watches are appearing in movies, they literally have a category for that, and you can go through it all. And that's something very different that you don't really see really anywhere else. So very cool.
And if you Google, because some of the pages are not very evident, like what and where they are, but I just Googled like Hamilton Oppenheimer watch, and there is a page, lo and behold, on the Hamilton website that details. There's a whole page dedicated to just Oppenheimer the movie, and then at the very bottom there is a list of all of the watches, including who actually wore it in real life. So Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer wore one called the Cushion B, the Lexington, and the Endicott, released in the 30s and the 40s, of course. And some pretty cool watches. So if you, again, haven't gone to the website, feel free to just like punch in something like that. One last thing about the Murph I wanted to mention before we move on to the Jazzmaster is that the Murph, that when he falls and then ends up behind something, right? If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. I'm trying not to spoil anything here. There's a lot of colors there, right? And I just put 2 and 2 together. That's what the box is. So if you order the movie watch, the Field Murph actually comes in a box that's got all of these vertically striped, red, blue, green, and yellow, and just so on and so forth. So it's not like rainbow, but if you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and that clicked like right away. So it's just like one more little attention to detail. So all the way down to the picture and where they're placing the second hand. That's how much that they actually give way to these movies, and how much of like a say so, and just how much like pride I think that they take into positioning their watches in all of these movies. So very, very cool.
I like that too, because I like how sometimes people are like, well, they stole it from us, this was our own idea. They very lean into the movie that the watch is based from, and so I think that's a pretty cool thing. And again, it's marketing employees, so I think it'll help. Shifting gears to a more modernistic watch is the Jazzmaster Jazzmaster, not Jab Master. The Jazzmaster actually came out in the mid 2000s, so you're talking 21st century, very modernistic looks with a case diameter of 40 to 42 millimeters and a case thickness from 11 to 15 millimeters, which seemed very big. And I was trying to
Big
figure
range.
out what watches were 15 millimeters, but that is a very thick boy right there. Water resistance between 5 and 10 bars, so you're again pretty good, honestly. Again, it's a modern watch, and it's holding on to those modern sizes, so it can have that. But pretty good for a non-diver, 10 bar.
Yeah,
You're still talking 3 hertz beats, and then an automatic skeleton H10-S movement is what is here, again with the 80-hour power reserve. This has a very big variation on pricing. They have skeleton versions, which of course I love. I like the good skeleton watches that are subtle, not like the entire watch is open, but you have a few windows, and that's exactly what these watches offer here. The bands, or not straps, the bracelets on these watches, to me, if you look at them online, because it looks just like the watch that our buddy Honor has, it looks like an S&P 300 bracelet almost. You
Oh yeah,
notice
it
that?
does. Yeah,
So
I mean, I've been looking at it the
yeah.
whole time, but I didn't
Yeah.
put that together until right now. It
Yeah, it
really
looks
does.
like a very S&P 300 bracelet on these watches. Again, very different, just a completely out there, vibe, I guess you could say, for Hamilton versus what we've talked about in the past and what the majority of their watches are, which are very vintage, US based. These are almost like space watches. And but they have a few different models, but these is crazy looking at the price differential, because it can start around like $500 and go up to $6,000 depending on what movements and the gold materials, plus of course the skeleton backing. So these watches are very very cool, very much out there. What do you think about them with an open case back as well, which I like?
Yeah. I do love the open case back on that model particularly, and they are leaning more into skeleton dials as of late, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't really have a way to like confirm that. I can't, really magically punch out how many skeleton versions that they've released from decade
Well, you
over
can
decade,
tell
but it does seem like they're pushing a lot more. When you go to
Yeah.
to the Jazzmaster Collection, you see a lot of that, and a lot of that is featured too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's cool. They're doing like the open heart, I think is what
Yeah.
is what one of them is called. So that's going to be like isn't that the least amount of skeleton dial? It's just a little kind of a small circle. And I
Yeah.
think that one's called the open heart version. So you've got like all types of skeleton when it comes to it. One of those that David's already talking about that has a like the S&P style
Mm-hmm.
bracelet. That dial is kind of unique because it like it's skeleton, but it's not skeleton. Like it's got this dial and it's cut out in this really like seemingly chaotic way.
Yeah.
So you can see through it, but there's really no like rhyme or reason as to what you're seeing.
Yeah.
It just looks like a piece of paper that someone wet and then ripped it open, and you're like, okay, that
Crochet or
imprint.
something.
Yeah. And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
well, that's what the dial's going to look like. So it's
Mhm.
very unique, and there's a lot to offer in that category. But yeah, I mean, the Jazzmaster, I mean, to me, like my sort of, one take on it, the Jazzmaster is the Hamilton collection that is the most refined.
Mhm.
And so if you're looking for something that, to David's point, is a more modern approach to a dress
Very
watch,
modern, yeah.
you're going to find it here. If you're looking for a Hamilton with a skeleton dial, you're also going to find that here. And then if
Mhm.
you're looking for just some of the more complicated watches, and by complicated, we're talking about like chronometer, like, automatic chronometers and things like that, you're also going to find some of that sit in the Jazzmaster collection. So, yeah, there's a little bit of something for everybody, I think, in there,
Mhm.
but just like all in all, yeah, this is the modern, sort of elegant and modern formal
They're
look
much
from them.
they're much bigger too than all the other Hamiltons we talk about are normally around, anywhere from 36 to 40 tops. These men's watches are 40, 41, 42, and then women's are even 36s here. The ladies skeleton autos are 36 millimeters.
Well, and
And
I think that's oh, sorry, go
no,
ahead
go
and
ahead.
finish that.
Go ahead. That was
I
it.
was just gonna say, I think that is probably due to the field watches probably just playing heritage and just just
Mhm.
paying homage to field watches of back in the day and back when. If
Yeah.
I had to guess, that's what that's from, is, them trying to keep the proportions on the field, and like the Navy and the pilot watches, probably true to size as close as they can. I mean, obviously, we're not wearing pocket watches today, and we're not wearing 32 millimeter pilot watches, but I think that's probably why. And then they take the Jazzmaster and they say, well, maybe this is where we can stretch out the sizing a little bit. This is what maybe
Yeah.
where we can give
Oh,
people
yeah.
more water resistance and a little bit of a bigger dial. Maybe it's thicker. Maybe this is where we put the more complicated watches is into that Jazzmaster collection, and the cost is reflected there too.
Oh yeah, definitely. All of
You know,
these are the majority of these are over $1,000 or at least
hmm
right at it.
Yep.
Um, but anyways, so I just thought that was a cool watch. They have a thin line collection as well, which are very thin watches. Those are around $700, very racing centric with
hmm
solid black dials and red sword hands, I guess you would call those, with even little sub dials in them, which are kind of very cool. Just a different watch.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a very interesting watch, the thin line.
Yeah.
Um, it's another one of those things
Special
where it's like
edition. Yeah.
the dial, like I'm not really certain, kind of like where that comes from, but
I wonder how many of those they sell, because those are very, like, I feel like, again, very controversial. You either love or hate them watches.
yeah,
It's
the
almost like a
thin.
Movado. Imagine a Movado face, but with some more dimension in it. So it's like
hmm
just completely blank, and then but with dimension, and then you have the bright red hour and minute hands.
It's styled off of a Asian science fiction film, and I
Makes
guess
sense. Yeah.
novel that it was based on. So there's there's a little bit of that in the design, but nonetheless, it's, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. The Wandering Earth 2 exclusive watch
The
partner.
Wandering Earth. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so let's talk about this watch. Your last watch you're going to talk about, I think, is a very underrated
Oh
and a
yeah.
great chronograph to buy if this is your price point, because I love
Oh
the
yeah.
look at these.
Oh yeah. Yeah. This is this is probably a fan favorite for Hamilton.
Mm,
If you're not into a field watch, if you're not a field watch guy or gal, and the Murph is not for you, this is probably going to be one of your favorite ones. Yeah. So next, I want to talk about the Hamilton Intra-Matic chronograph. The Intra-Matic's a really cool watch. This is based on, I mean, more or less based on a design from the Chronograph A and B from Hamilton, which those were produced in the mid 1960s. So stainless steel on these again, in 40 millimeter. As far as I can tell, they're all going to be 40 mil. Case thickness of 14.45. So remember, this is a chronograph. We're going to be a little bit thicker on this one. Water resistance again at 100 meters, and as you can see, the theme there, most of Hamilton watches are going to be subsequent there. The caliber in this is going to be the H31 or the Hamilton 31, which is an ETA / Valjoux 7753 base.
mhm.
This one beats at 4 hertz, so a little bit different, right? We talked about that on the Murph, where that one's at 3 hertz, and truly, in most of Hamilton's are going to beat at that 21,600 BPH. But because this one goes up to 28.8, with the idea, I'm sure, that chronographs need to be a little bit more precise, and so speeding that up, just like think about a spring drive chronograph, right? We talked about that, right? Spring drive, there's a perfect glide. We've talked about that in the past, and that when it comes to timing and milliseconds and tenths of seconds, that stuff's important. Because it's going to beat at 4 hertz, though, the downside of that, power reserve on this watch is going to draw back to 60 hours. And when it comes to cost, we're going to be looking at $2,345 for the automatic versions and $2,145 for the mechanical or manual wind versions of this. And I have to say, this watch it looks very vintage inspired. It even has a sort of a like an older kind of a, I don't want to say like throwback or vintage, but it's just an older Hamilton logo. So the actual logo itself is unchanged, but the font Hamilton, unlike the Indiana Jones watch we just talked about, for example, this one's going to be slanted. It's going to be a lot thinner, and kind of the letters are sort of smushed together a little bit. So it's an older iteration of the scripting that they used to use. And I think probably the most popular model that they make here, or variant that they make here, is going to be on this kind of like reverse panda dial, where we have this kind of ivory cream colored dial And then the sub dials are going to be black. So you've got a date wheel at the 6 o'clock. You're going to have black subs for the chronograph functions. And then again, that kind of ivory dial. It comes on like a kind of like one of those, what do they call those? Like a bead of rice bracelet, style bracelet. But some of them do come on leather. So I'm sure you can just swap those over. I personally don't like that bead of rice styling myself. And I don't think that it works well for the chronograph, for that specific one, the ivory one. But I think that that's one of the more popular ones because they do have some that are a little bit more modern. For example, they've got like a navy dial that has the ivory scale on the outside and the ivory subdials. But I think that that takes a little bit more of like a modern approach. And so they actually offer that one on like a brown leather strap that looks pretty nice. But again, my personal preference is just take that vintage styling and run all the way home with it, and maybe just swap out and go get you, a different type of croc strap or something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, and this model initially released as a manual wind. They of course now offer the automatic, but that idea of like a manual wind chronograph, I mean, that's a very traditional thing. Like a lot of watch collectors really like that, and you think back to watches like the Omega, Speedmaster Professional, the original Moonwatch. I mean, these are manual wind chronographs, and so it's a very traditional, I think, offering from Hamilton. I think something that makes it a little bit more special and unique. We've talked about the Panda dial offerings, but also some of the more modern offerings. So I think that you've got options there. And then just from like a cost perspective, I wanted to touch on this really quickly and get your thoughts on this. In some of our first episodes, we talked about the idea of like non-in-house movements costing too much, and the likes of like a Longines, using these like exclusively made for Longines, but made by ETA, part of the Swatch Group movement, and then they're charging you like $3,000 for like a Spirit Zulu time. So again, we're going to be looking at like an ETA based movement here. Under $2,500 for automatic or mechanical, whichever way that you go to. But thinking about like what other competition is around that when it comes to chronographs, and I did some research, like the Longines catalog.
Longines.
Yeah, but that's going to be, I mean, almost double. Well, not almost double, but my research 3,200 to 4,500, depending on the model of Spirit that you're looking at. The Tissot PRX chronograph is 1,900, so pretty similar, but it's a completely
I'd rather
different
have
design.
a Hamilton. I'd rather have a Hamilton than Tissot.
The PRX is just that's a integrated steel sports watch that is just in a different genre of watch altogether, but it technically is chronograph in one of these entry level brands. The Tudor Black Bay Chrono, those are 5,500, so that actually is $2,000 more. But you're getting that in-house and the Metis certification, which is coming up.
I feel like that's worth it. Yeah, I feel about $5,000 for an in-house movement is definitely worth it. Especially if you're a good movement.
Yeah. I don't think that these are like overpriced. I don't know. I mean, I think these are good costs for the money, because I think it's like the more that I did my research around it, you realize that the other brands, like Longines is the best comparison, and they're charging you in some cases $2,000 more.
Yeah, that's crazy. I would, if comparing the two, if they were around the same price, I would say I'd rather have a Longines, but I wouldn't pay $2,000 more for a Longines. The one we're looking at now, I don't know the exact one, but the Hamilton, the one that looks like the Panda, is awesome. I mean, I love that watch,
and that's $2,300 before taxes.
Yeah, that's knee jerk. Sure, it seems high for a Hamilton, because Hamiltons you think between $500 and $1,200. But if you did the research and you're looking at it, I agree. If they're all way more expensive, then I would take that watch. If you just want a simple chronograph, that you don't care about anything much more, and you're not trying to save up for something else. Now, if you're like, hey, I really want the Black Bay Chrono, their version of the Panda, which looks very similar to this, just a little more beefy, and that is a beefy watch. I wouldn't spend $2,300. I'd say save another $2,300, because I think you get much better watch for 5,000
Yeah.
versus 2,300. But if you're like, hey, this is all I want, this is all I'm ever going to want to spend, I just want something simple, then yeah, I think this is definitely good. But I agree with the knee-jerk reaction of, I think this is starting to creep up there. I mean, I would never buy the Longines Zulu and all that because I think
Mm-mm.
it's too expensive for what it is. I 100% agree with that, and I think this is creeping that direction. But again, if you love Hamilton or this is all you'll want and you're a very simple watch guy and you just want something simple and cheaper, then yeah, this is a great watch. And it'll
Yeah.
work, and again, get the value and the history behind it.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to buy a $5,000 chrono, I would save the extra $2,500 and get the $5,000 chrono.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of comparing the Longines and the Hamilton, I think that's very easy to do, and you can very quickly tell which one is overcharging you, and it's not Hamilton. In the case of Tudor, like you said, it's 2x the cost, but you're
Yeah.
getting a lot more for it. So now
Yeah.
the question is just, do you have that extra money to spend? If you don't,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with the Hamilton.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, I mean, we've, this is our 16th episode, and I like openly said it and was like proud to say it way back in February, March, and April. I was like, look, if you're using off the shelf movements and you're charging me like north of $1,000, like at the time I really, 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 truly thought that was like a ripoff. And it's not that I don't think that it's a ripoff, but I guess I know that like those ETA bases, I mean, Hamilton is going to obviously tune that. They're going to update that. They're going to bring it closer into that range of specs that you would expect from something maybe that like an in-house provider or that an in-house caliber is going to offer you. So I don't expect it to be out at those numbers that 7753 I believe is going to come factory regulated to. Hamilton are going to do some additional regulation to get that closer to spec, and I think that's fine and dandy, because the benefit to having those off the shelf movements is that they don't mess up. Like if Hamilton were to come and make a fully in-house movement starting tomorrow, it might be 5 or 3 years before we get that, and you could have issues there. So I don't think that it's overpriced. I think Longines is overpriced, because you look at it and you're like, well, they basically did the same thing. They took something that was off the shelf from ETA, and then they just kind of tweaked it, and they regulated it a little bit, closer to what one might expect from like a Kosk or like a Metis, certified movement. But they're charging you a lot more. Tudor is 2x the cost because it is Metis and it is in-house and it's Tudor. It's just I mean, they're under Rolex. They're just a bigger brand. So I think that this watch is actually pretty well positioned, all of that considered.
So I mean, again, a great watch. It really just depends on your price points, and I think we hit the nail on the head. But it is a great looking watch. Definitely recommend you going online. I'm sure, again, we like to post a lot of these watches we talk about, so just keep an eye up on our Instagram and YouTube or whatever, and gives you a reason to follow.
Yeah.
And so let's step off into Mailbag. We did get a question from a listener today or yesterday, I believe. And I thought it was a good one, so I'll go ahead and question it. Why do you think a watch with so much history and significance in Hollywood hasn't really upped their pricing to, say, something like a Longines? They seem very consistent when it comes to the watch prices, even through after so many movies in the late 1990s and 2000s have put them on the radar. So what do you think about that? Then I'll kind of give you my 2 cents. I don't have a lot to say. I think you pretty much can nail it all down. It's pretty simple, but I will give my opinion afterwards. So what do you think?
Yeah, I'll be quick here and as concise as I can be. I just think that Hamilton, that they're not trying to do anything that they shouldn't. I don't think they're trying to be anybody that they aren't. This is an American-born watch company that, we've already talked about it. Their main claim to fame is that they've made a few watches that have been in movies, and they made a ton of military watches, and then they started out making railway watches. So, again, that doesn't strike me as like the foundation and the backbone of a company that is going to suddenly get a little bit of fame and then start ripping everyone off and start upping and charging. That strikes me as a company that, it seems like from a very outside perspective that you and I have, that they've done things thus far for the right reasons. They like being in movies, and they like to, offer us those watches too. I think that's cool. So yeah, I think that at least to me, as simple as that. They're just trying to be themselves, and they're doing what they're doing. They're staying in their lane. They're not concerned with others. They know what they have, and they know the market that they serve, and I think they're doing that pretty damn well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big reason, and you can sit here, I was going to ask you about it when you were talking about the Longines versus this one, but I thought it'd be good to wait here. Um, do you know how we always talk about Japanese, Chinese, any Asian market watches always have a stigma, and that's why the values a lot of the times will go down. Maybe either it doesn't start very high, or as soon as you buy them, they go down a lot. Versus a
Mhm.
Swiss made, Omega, a Rolex, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a stigma here with American? Yeah, I mean these guys started American. This is the Europe has the stranglehold on the watch community, and I feel
Yeah.
like if you're not starting out in Europe by some, whatever. I'm trying to think of some big watch name maker. What's the guy? FP Jorn. If you're not
Oh, yeah,
FP,
yeah.
somebody like that started these things, your value just isn't there. And
Yeah.
these guys did start in the U.S., so they're not in Europe. They're very rugged. They made tool watches, and that's exactly what their start is. And I think there's probably a little stigma there, because if not, I think they would be on the level of Longines. I think they are probably on the level of Longines when it comes to volume, but when it just comes to pricing and value, I think they're just a step under. And I really think the only reason they are is because they had that initial stigma in the early 1900s to be in a tool watch. And I think that's great for them
Yeah.
because that allows them to be in so many movies. But I definitely think that's probably why the value isn't there as it is on some other watches that have the same exact type of movements. It's just Hamilton or it's Longines. And Longines is Europe, all the big racing. We've talked about them and their history with their original owners and all. I think it's just a little different. I think that's why the value is not there. So I think that was a great question. It's something, it honestly made me think for a minute, because I think the question was right. Like, hey, these guys, they are such a big standard in the US market when it comes to movies. I mean, Oppenheimer, they're in every single character in that movie has it. Interstellar, all the main characters in that movie is wearing one. The Martian, same thing. Band of Brothers, any war movies, and I'm sure there are many more war movies that are out there that are featuring these watches. So these might be a big staple in the US, but when it comes to, world market, is probably, not as much. And I think that's, it's how it is with Seiko and all, how Seiko is, everybody wears some sort of Seiko over in Asia and over here, US a little bit, but in Europe, not many. And, I think it really just depends on where you're from. And the people in the US see a lot of Hamilton. Hamilton gets rammed down their throat with a lot of the US movies. And I think that's why some of the value can seem like, hey, we should have this value, way much higher, because I see it all the time. But maybe, in Europe, Asia, somewhere else, they don't really see Hamilton. So it's really just a US based lens that you're looking at Hamilton through. But
Yeah.
anyways, needless to say, great watch, great movies, great
Yeah.
watch brands. And if you guys haven't seen any of the movies or shows that we've talked about, we highly recommend, because
Oh my
honestly,
God.
that's probably the best dang call to fame that Hamilton has. Almost every movie they're in is freaking awesome.
Yeah.
So it's
Damn,
very cool.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
We had a whole episode to talk about the movies, and we did, but I didn't even think about that. I mean, every movie that they're in. I mean,
It's because Christopher
Indiana
Nolan
Jones.
loves them. And,
Indiana
Steven
Jones might be
Spielberg.
the worst movie that Hamilton's featured in.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I bet, and I don't know this for a fact, but I wonder if any of the older Indiana Jones that were great had Hamiltons in them as well.
yeah, I wonder if
I
they
bet
had
you they
like,
did. The Temple of
yeah.
Doom, all those old school ones, whatever, the Lost Ark one, all the old movies. I bet you featured them too. But
Yeah.
anyways. But a very cool, very, very great brand. Again, ask us any questions you have. All of these brands that we cover, if you're new here, we have talked about going back over them, maybe once a year, kind of doing recaps on what's happened with Grand Seiko, Rolex, so if you have any questions, definitely let us know. We'll either do it at the beginning of new episodes or make our own episode later down the road. So definitely follow us on everything. Subscribe. It's all free, so it just helps us out more than you would even know. So definitely hit that like button and tell your friends about us.
Yeah. I echo everything that David said. We have a lot of fun doing this. We hope that you guys do as well. And just want to say thanks for spending an hour and a half with us twice a month. So thanks again. Hope that you guys enjoyed this one. Have a great week and weekend, and we'll be back next time with, I don't know, maybe a more pricey brand.
Yeah,
I don't
I think
know.
we'll step it up a little bit again. We've hit a few lower,
or maybe we'll throw it out to the listeners. I don't know.
Yeah.
Hey, there's one up behind you that we haven't talked about. Oh, now you got to go to YouTube to find it out. You got to go to YouTube now, baby.
That one. Yep.
Wait, just kidding. A lot of our YouTube stuff is not up. So wait, just disregard what I just
He's
said.
like, wait, I gotta post on YouTube.
We've had video issues lately. So cool. No, anyway, thank you guys. Have a great week. We'll be back soon.